Hey folks, it's Sam. We have Mercury Retrograde now happening in Scorpio here on November 25th until December 15th. Mercury Retrograde will be going in Scorpio. It starts in Jyestha Nakshatra. I'm going to be talking about that today, what it means overall for us. There's a lot going on these days in the world with Mars, who's also about to go retrograde, Jupiter retrograde in the sky, a bunch of stuff going on today. And, we're here at the end of 2024, be moving into 2025. It's right around the corner. And so there's a lot of these things up for grabs. I'm going to be talking about quite a bit of those, quite a bit of that today, and especially focusing on the Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. Folks, as you know, 2025 is right around the corner. I'm making some readings to get you ready and get you on track for 2025. We have some big changes that are happening. Saturn is going to be moving into Pisces, where we're dissolving structure, whether we want to or not. Jupiter's moving into Gemini, expanding ideas, but also expanding disinformation and bad ideas. Nodes move into the Aquarius Leo axis, where we're serving culture or king. Also a lot of other things ahead, numerous retrograde cycles, including Venus retrograde, a lot of energy on Pisces early in the year. I'm doing these quick readings that are based on, I say quick, it's a 30-minute assessment of your chart, your dashas, and all of these shifts that are coming. So again, a lot coming up, eclipse cycles, and a lot more. So check it out and register for the reading while you can. Yeah, so there are big shifts ahead, and I will have a link in there if you did want to get that 30-minute assessment for your chart. But as you see here, we have this Sun Mercury here in Scorpio. Sun is in the Nakshatra of Anuradha, and Mercury is in Jyeshta Nakshatra. Mercury turning retrograde again. This is the 26th, but it actually happens on the 25th, 26th. So, when Mercury goes retrograde, it's really a time to reflect on that story that's running in our head. We all have this story, this interpretation of what's happening, and that sort of running narrative that's always, going and explaining, oh, this is what's happening. This is what everything means. Now, when Mercury is in Scorpio, that story becomes, sort of emotional, sort of like emotionally heavy. When Mercury is in Scorpio, there's this, again, the story can be kind of sinister or feel kind of sinister if we're not careful. Again, it doesn't have to be sinister, but it's often where the story becomes like, oh, I better be careful because things are dangerous, or, people might be out to get me, or I better, make sure that, that people don't get me, or that I'm safe, and things like that, which, all of that is fine. All of that is normal and reasonable in a general sense. But then again, Mercury isn't necessarily in its highest state here, because Mercury does really well in the air signs and earth signs, where he's in his element. It's better that the story is open or practical, not emotional. And so again, in a general sense, Mercury in Scorpio is more on that kind of emotional end, and also emotionally kind of triggered and frustrated. If you could put a couple simple ideas together that describe Scorpio, it's like emotional frustration. It's ruled by Mars, where there's some frustration, but it's like emotional frustration, and even like emotional combativeness and emotional willfulness. But it's also emotional courage. But again, many times the emotional courage of Scorpio comes after some kind of battle, some kind of conflict, and it's often, especially when it's in detriment or in a confusing sense, there's emotional courage, but it seems like the only way to get the courage is to do battle, like with someone else over ideas. Like, yes, I had the courage to fight for what I wanted. in the form of like some argument or something, which again, that's not necessarily emotional courage. That's argumentative. And real emotional courage is not necessarily arguing about what someone has done to us in our own mind, but the courage to face ourselves. That's really what emotional courage is. That's what Scorpio is. So after feeling the sort of triggering of Scorpio, the actual emotional courage of Scorpio is to then have the courage to be devoted and to have devotion and to not engage in battle. So again, when you put Mercury in this position, Mercury is, again, is about these stories and this idea and this narrative and this, oh, here's what things mean. And again, when you get Mercury in Scorpio, it can be easily interpreted in a way, like I said, where it's like, oh, right, I have the courage to tell you what you did wrong because you did this and I got the courage to tell you. Again, this is how Mars and Mercury are really sort of interrupt each other quite a bit. Because again, Mercury is about the story and the communication, and Mars is about the battle. Mercury isn't about the battle. Mercury isn't a battler. It's not a fighter. It's trying to understand things and be intelligent about things. Really, true intelligence and true discrimination, which is what Mercury is about, having the true discrimination to really understand what's going on. When we do truly understand something, that's the antidote to frustration. We're frustrated by things that we don't understand because there's nothing wrong with anything, actually. And when we think there's something wrong, again, this is Mars, there's something right, something wrong, this thing is wrong, and I'm frustrated about it. It's because we're not seeing a bigger picture. And that bigger picture and that discrimination is what Mercury does. That's why Mercury comes after Mars in that planetary order. Mercury says, oh, okay, that's what was going on. And by the way, a big part of the Mercury story and getting the story straight is seeing our part in the frustration, the thing we're frustrated about. And again, this is how Scorpio can have these blind spots, because Mars isn't really interested in that part. Mars is really about winning. And again, in a very important sense, we're here, we all want to win. We don't want to have nuance in certain aspects of life, right? We don't want to have nuance in certain aspects of life. We just want to win. We want to get the result that we want, right? And fight to get the result that we want. That's what Mars is really about in a higher sense, in the highest sense, going through that difficulty so that we win and not lose. And again, the great victory over our difficulty means that we have to think really quite simply. I talk often about, that I play tennis and whatnot. One of the things about being able to win at sports is you need to have a short memory, because you go through cycles. And again, Mercury is about kind of sort of like remembering things. And, a good athlete is both, focused, is mostly focused on where they're going in the moment, not thinking about the thing they lost or the point they lost or the thing, whatever. It's not about nuance. It's about, okay, whatever happened, I'm still in the fight and I want to win. But so that's what Mercury is. It's very, I'm sorry, that's what Mars is. It's a very simplistic energy. In Scorpio, though, it gets quite complex because Scorpio is about emotions and feelings. So the point being is that when you get Mercury in Scorpio, there's this sort of collision a little bit of this, wanting to strengthen our emotional, our emotional responses to things, which is already a bit complicated. And then Mercury, which is about nuance and detail and, discrimination, trying to understand what happened. Now, again, like to use the tennis example, while you're playing a match, you have to recognize patterns and whatnot, but you can't get too involved in all of that. You have to recognize, okay, this is happening, but now if I need to win this point, I need to concentrate on this thing right now and then eventually win, and then I'll analyze it later, right? But with Mercury, again, we can get too much in the analysis, for example, and not be focused enough on winning, for example, as the sports metaphor goes. And so in a very neutral sense, Mercury and Scorpio can be kind of vacillating between this kind of emotional story where we're kind of stuck, and instead of remembering that we need to face our own shortcomings and we need to be victorious over our own emotional vulnerabilities. We need to be victorious over that. We need to win that battle. That's the only battle that we really need to win. Again, when Mercury's in Scorpio, we get too stuck in the whole story about it and the whole kind of thing, and we lose focus. We lose the real thrust and the real focus. And that's just in general when Mercury's in Scorpio, that we get stuck in this emotional story. So with the retrograde, like where we are now for the next several weeks, it's a good opportunity to reflect on this process. That's why I'm talking about this process. And reflect and see how we're doing this. And we're making it too complicated and we're losing the point here. And again, the point with any Mars theme that's a sign ruled by Mars, the nature of Mars, is that we're trying to win. We're trying to win that battle. And there's really only one battle that's worth winning, and that's the battle over our own ignorance and our own weakness. Because again, what happens when Mars is weak, or when there's difficult energy in Scorpio, for example, or Aries, is instead of having authentic strength, we get stuck in this kind of counterfeit strength that says, oh yeah, I'm weak because of what you did. It's your fault that I'm weak. Your fault that this, and we get into this kind of thing and we get the story wrong. And it's not a judgment. It doesn't mean that sometimes people don't do things to us or whatever it might be. But what I'm saying is that to your Mars, to the Mars in you, that's not going to be a satisfactory answer. Being victim in your story is not going to make the Mars part of you happy. The Mars part of you understands that you're not the victim in the story, you're the hero in the story. And part of being the hero in the story is overcoming the adversity to eventually win. So that's why I'm saying, like with the tennis example, right? Eventually, you have to stay on course. You have to understand and recognize the pattern, but the goal is to win the match. And by the way, it's very interesting because I have a lot of Mercury energy and I play a lot of tennis. And it's one of the things I have to remind myself all the time is to try to, I have to tell myself when I'm playing a match, because I also just like to play and I like to try shots. And that's very different than win points and win the match. And I have to tell myself, I'll say to myself, Sam, stop playing around and win the point. Your job is to win the point if you want to win the match, not try shots and play around. Mercury likes to play and try things and play with ideas and think about things, which is great in its appropriate, time. But if you're trying to win the match, which is the Mars thing, you have to say, here's this thing that is going to win the point. I need to keep doing this and win, not try and play around and try shots rather than win points. Mercury is like try shots. Mars is win points. And the Mars part of you wants to win and is trying to win over your own weakness. Because that's the only battle that you're really trying to fight. You get stuck sometime making it too complicated, playing around with the ideas that, oh no, it really is this other person's fault or this other thing or this incredibly complicated thing that's going on. That's really the reason why I am not winning. That's really the reason why I'm so frustrated. It's this very complicated story. And now let me tell you how complicated I can justify for 1,000 years why I'm justified in being angry and holding onto this grudge and being nasty and mean and not moving past this thing. Here, let me explain how complicated it is. And this is what we can do. And, if you live my life, you'll know that this is what I do when I do readings, how hard it is many times to get people out of their story. Because everybody's trying to overcome these things. Everybody's trying to overcome these things, and yet they're wrapped up in these stories. Oh no, but you don't realize my childhood and this, and I get it. Everybody can justify very easily these stories of how we were treated this way. No, you don't understand, really. Here's why. I'm like, no, I do understand. And I do also understand that the Mars part of you is trying to defeat that. And we can get stuck in justifying our frustration, right? So again, this is how Mars and Mercury look very similar to each other, right? So this retrograde of Mercury going retrograde now is where we can unwind that story, listen more to the others, listen to our heart and whatnot. And again, this is really, as we move into 2025, it's also quite important. And if you haven't gotten it yet, you want to get the 2025 free web class that I have for you, because that's really will also shed a lot of light. And again, this Mercury is also in Jyeshta Nakshatra. It's going to go retrograde, and then it's going to go back over that again early next year. But I'll talk about this Jyeshta Nakshatra part also, because it's very important to understand the Jyeshta Nakshatra. But first, check this out. You want to go to 2025vedicastrology.com for my free forecast on the 10 most important shifts that you need to know coming up in 2025. There will have implications long into the future, both collectively and personally. Mars between Gemini and Cancer from January 1st to June 6th. We have Venus retrograde. We have Mercury retrograde. We have solar eclipse in Pisces. Saturn in Aquarius. Rahu and Ketu move from where they're at now to the Aquarius-Leo axis. We also have Jupiter going into Gemini. All of these things are going to affect you, and you'll want to know how. So just register. It's free. Go to 2025vedicastrology.com. It's very easy, and you'll really get a lot out of this. Yeah, and also I will be talking about how these things affect how each of the 12 signs are going to be affected this Jupiter in Gemini, as you see. I'm also going to be talking about that for all 12 signs, including yours. And by the way, there was a little mistake. It's actually Saturn in Pisces. When I made this page at first, I put Aquarius, and I had the wrong date. And it's supposed to be May. I have this. I still have to correct this. Anyway, so it's Saturn moving into Pisces, and it's May 3rd. So anyway, I'm sorry, May 29th. But so it's been corrected, and it's accurate on the web class. But you want to check that out and be ready for 2025. So you'll see those links below this video. But you know, this Mercury is in Jyeshta Nakshatra, and that's the part of Scorpio, the end of Scorpio, in the section that's called the Gandanta, which is the last nakshatra in the water sign, before the next fire sign nakshatra, which is called Mula. And so this Jyeshta Mula Gandanta is a very kind of tenuous point. It's where the knot becomes loosened, and where energy is quite volatile. And again, what happens in between the other signs, between the fire and earth signs, earth and air signs, air and water signs, is that there's a nakshatra bridging the two. Here, there's not. So this is where there's a very hard stop. And so there can be this feeling of a sort of foreboding kind of ending. Like it right now, it can really feel like there's this kind of stress and fear, like and this stress about, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Like, we have to fight this big battle. Like, we feel like we're fighting some big intellectual battle right now. And again, you know, for those of us who live in America, for example, we just had this big election, and there's so many big things going on in the world. This nakshatra of Jyeshta, this end of Scorpio, before this Gandanta point, again, has this quality where it feels like things are getting unloosened, like untied, like unraveling. is also a real quality of the nakshatras at the last degrees of the water signs, which would be Revati, Aslesha, and Jyeshta. Is things feel like they're sort of unraveling here. And it is where the zodiac kind of unravels and then reconstitutes when it goes into the next sign. So you may be feeling like things are kind of unraveling or unloosening or getting untied, but also maybe untangled. So you want to also look for that possibility that maybe many things, and we can see how many things in our world right now are getting untangled, are getting unmoored from their pillars. A lot of pillars of the world are sort of untangling, and it's scary. Like, well, where is this going to lead? And so there's this feeling with the Mercury retrograde here in Scorpio, this sign of stress and fear and worry, and in this gandanta point where, if we're not sure of what's going to happen, we can just become sort of unmoored from safety, security, reality. What's next? Because again, that's really what Scorpio is. Scorpio into Sagittarius, the sign is where we realize how vulnerable we are in this world, and we're looking for a higher answer, a higher purpose. That's the Scorpio Sagittarius transition anyway. Because at the end of Scorpio, we realize, okay, I am vulnerable, and this life is finite through the body. So what is the higher answer? What is a higher purpose? That's the Sagittarius, principle. So Scorpio leads into Sagittarius this way, but along the way, this crossover point between Jyeshta and Mula is where these ideas, we sort of become unmoored from reality, from the false reality. Let's make it clear, the false reality that you are this person on earth. That's actually the false reality. And so the Jyeshta Mula axis is where you get, or the Jyeshta Mula Gandanta point is actually where you become untangled and unmoored from that false reality, the false reality that, yes, me, this person alive on earth who has all of these things and I'm in control of them, really. That whole game falls apart in Scorpio. And you're like, oh, actually, no, I'm not this person who has all these things. What do I do now? This is how the Jyeshta knot loosens, and then the Mula knot comes, and we need to pull out all of that false structure by the roots and plant these new seeds of wisdom and truth that are more transcendent. So this is a big part of this retrograde. Mercury's going right up to that point, about a degree away, and stopping. So he's stationed there. Mercury stationary retrograde at this end of Scorpio, where it's like, okay, well, what's coming next? I don't really know. Yeah, I know. You don't know. None of us know. And yes, it makes us uncomfortable. But so again, rather than the typical paranoid story that's coming in and going, okay, well, and believe me, I feel it too. Like, okay, well, we just had this election. Who knows what's going to happen? Oh my God, look at all this. Oh my God, right? It's very easy to legitimately be like a little freaked out about like election and other things in the world. So we need to have this show us the truth that we're not in control. We've never been in control. We've had this illusion of control throughout our life, but even that illusion of control is simply that. It's an illusion of control that we need to overcome, and as this Mercury goes retrograde, where it's going to be in Scorpio into next year. And by the way, that's also one of the shifts that I that I talk about in the 2025 forecast. You see the first one. Oh, I have this Mercury retrograde. Oh, it's later. But actually, Mercury retrograde lasts into next year, as well as Mars is going to go retrograde into next year. This actually doesn't go into next year. It goes into December, but I should say Mercury is in Scorpio into next year. We'll be working through this cycle of this Mercury in Scorpio and this feeling of being sort of triggered and unexpected, of what's coming next. So this isn't, this is a long-term transit, and this Mercury will wind up having been in Scorpio for a couple months, for more than 2 months. And so, again, I hope that over the next few weeks, you can ponder what I've said, and it's helpful for you to stay cool and not get too, freaked out about what's coming in the world. And, Jyeshta Nakshatra is also ruled by Lord Indra, who is that heroic figure, that heroic king who takes on the real battles. So the things I talked about in the first part of the video relative to fighting the good fight and really fighting the battle in order to win, it's actually that part of Scorpio that has to remember what the real battle is and not to get stuck on side battles or side shows or playing around with things. Scorpio is wanting to be victorious over our fears and vulnerabilities, and that emotional courage and heroism comes from this section of Scorpio. So try to remember those things, and on the Mercury retrograde, unwind those sort of, if you have, vindictive, paranoid stories running, again, see that as the problem. You're not a victim of anything, okay? If you feel you're a victim, look just a little bit deeper, and you'll see that you've also perpetrated as much as been victimized or whatever it might be. Once we become an adult, we're implicated in everything. So again, this is how Mercury in Scorpio can be operating with a lot of illusion and darkness, rather because of the emotional nature, of the aggressive nature. So introspect on that part of the story as well, and connect to deeper devotion, which is the true promise of Scorpio and the true emotional battle that needs to be won.